In the name of Allah, the most gracious, ever merciful. Hello there, hope you are doing well. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-khalq al-mursaleen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim ajma'in. Please check the sound in the picture and say if is everything good. Does everything works well? Quickly, please. So today, inshallah, we will discuss in a hurry the different types of literary criticism. I know that I discussed almost all types of literary criticism in our lectures, but inshallah, I'll make a quick revision and starting from the very beginning, okay? So for those who attended the lectures, would be a good review or a good revision. And those who didn't attend the lecture will be, inshallah, helpful to know what does literary criticism type mean and what are the common types of literary criticism. So, let's go. As you know, we discussed in the previous lectures what's the meaning of literary criticism, why should we have different types of literary criticism, and why are the definitions of literary criticism varied according to the critic himself. And we said, why should we have these varied literary criticism? Okay, then we said the changing role of literary criticism and the principles of literary criticism, then qualification of literary critic. So it's a time to know what are the major types of literary criticism. So in this lecture, inshallah, we'll discuss the types of literary criticism, as I told you. So let's go on. The first type of literary criticism is legislative criticism. And legislative criticism, as I told you, is the earliest type of literary criticism in a matter of time. So to say, it is the earliest type in the history. So literary criticism, or particularly the legislative literary criticism, okay, is the earliest one in time. So if I ask you in the exam, for example, you have a multiple choice, legislative, judicial, theoretical, or descriptive criticism, and I asked you, space is the earliest one in the time or the history. First would be legislative criticism. Okay? Okay. So legislative criticism is the earliest one in the time, let's just say. So it's the earliest type known of literary criticism. Okay, what does it mean? Literary criticism means that a critic here is supposed to sit or to lay down the canons, the formulae, and the idealistic way of writing. So the literary critic here is supposed to teach the creative writing, to teach the poet or to teach the writer how to write well or how to write better. Okay, so this is a basic meaning of legislative criticism. So as if he is a lawmaker or a legislator, the literary critic here is assuming the role of lawmaker or the legislator. Of course, this type of literary criticism practiced by almost all Elizabethans, but for Sydney or Sydney apart. So the only one or the only exception of the Elizabethan critics who practiced that type of literary criticism during the 16th and the first years of the 17th century, it is Philip Sidney. Okay, that's it. Of course, this type of literary criticism nowadays becomes a matter of past. Why? Because it's not applicable, it's not practiced unless you might have it in booklets or pamphlets taught in academic departments in the American universities. Okay, that's it. So this is the first type of literary criticism, legislative criticism. Okay, do you have any questions in this type? Do you have any question with this type of literary criticism? Shall we go to the next one? Okay. So let's go to the next one. The next one is judicial criticism. And of course, in the meaning, it is next to that type of literary criticism. Why? Because it is actually does it take little time to appear on the screen? Notice that. Oh, yes, okay, appeared now. Judicial criticism. So, what's the meaning of judicial criticism? Of course, like the legislative criticism, now we have the judicial criticism from the word judge. Now, you know, the essential meaning or the basic meaning of the word, the criticism, is judgment. So here, the literary critic seeks, a literary critic seeks to pronounce judgment on a work of literature or on the basis of certain rules. What does it mean? This means that this literary critic seeks to pronounce a judgment upon a piece of work or a piece of literature according to or in the light of certain rules. Okay, so if the work is found to be adherent to these rules or these rules, it would be good. If it's not, it would be condemned as worthless or nonsense. Okay, these rules, of course, according to this type of literary criticism, are wrongly driven from the ancient Greek and Latin. Okay, so they are basically driven from the Greek and Latin as a representative of perfection. So as you know, the Latin and Greek for the European culture representing the classics, and the classics means perfection. So these rules are taken from the Latin and Greek, and they are often taken wrongly. So they are not taken in a correct way. They are taken wrongly. And these rules become the criteria for judging these pieces of literature. And of course, as I told you, if the work is found to be adherent or adhering to that rule, it would be good. If it's not, it would be judged as worthless or nonsense. Of course, these rules are driven from the works of great writers like Aristotle, like Horace, like Euripides, like Sophocles, and so on, like Ovid, and so on. Okay? This type of literary criticism is well known to be practiced by Dr. Johnson. So this is this type of literary criticism practiced by Dr. Johnson. So the most prominent figure of this type of literary criticism is Dr. Johnson. And Dr. Johnson was notoriously known approaching a literary work in the spirit of a hanging judge. So he approached a literary work as if he's going to pronounce him for death. He would exactly, or he would entirely destroy that work. So that spirit of hanging judge, of course, is something biased, something notorious, okay? And of course, that such judgment would be in a dogmatic, magisterial manner. So he pronounced his judgment in a dogmatic, to say it's not reasonable, it's not logical. So in that dogmatic and magisterial manner, he pronounced his judgment, which is almost be erratic and wayward, of course. Okay, so this type of literary criticism, as I told you, is practiced only by such a great figure of English culture, Dr. Johnson. Of course, this type of literary criticism is not a real or objective evaluation within the shade of that type of literary criticism. So any objective, any realistic evaluation of a literary work would be impossible within such type of literary criticism. Okay, so this is the second type of literary criticism, legislative criticism. Okay, so what about the next type of literary criticism? Next type of literary criticism is theoretical criticism. Now I have theoretical criticism concerned with what should I be preoccupied with? Then if I'm not preoccupied with that literary work, I'm going to practice, or I'm going to read critically. Of course, this type of literary criticism, theoretical criticism, deals with literary aesthetics. What does it mean? So I am not mainly or basically preoccupied with a given, for example, a specific short novel, a short story, or a novel, or a play, but I am mainly focusing upon the literary aesthetics. What makes a piece of work as a piece of literature? Okay, so the attention of the critic here focusing not only on this particular work, but on what makes out of this piece of literature a piece of literature. So the aesthetics in general. So here, when I check a given literary work, I study it from a perspective of the beauty, from the process of the creation itself. Okay, so how could I detect the principles of the process of artistic representation within this work? And of course, such detection would lead to creating a theory. So first of all, I think about this work not in a specific way, but on the way that makes it a piece of literature, makes it a piece of artistic work. I'm focusing on the process of creation itself, the principles of artistic creation or artistic beauty, in my way to create a theory. Okay, so this type of literary criticism is basically concerned with the process of artistic beauty or the aesthetic qualities of a given literary work. Okay, and in such way, theoretical criticism make it humble, beginning in the Sydney Apology for Poetry. So this type of literary criticism has its humble beginning with Philip Sidney in his work Apology for Poesy in French, or for poetry in English, okay, in the 17th century. Of course, another pioneer of this type of literary criticism is Dryden. And that literary critic, Dryden, has a great opposition for the legislative criticism. As you say, he made an objection for the legislative criticism. He has an objection for the legislative criticism. And as I told you, legislative criticism, the literary critic is supposed to lay down canons, formulae, and principles and rules to teach the writer, the poet, the artistic playwright to teach better, or to know how to teach. So to teach him how to write, or how to write better. Here, theoretical criticism is an objection for this type of literary criticism. And Dryden assumed that we will not wait, or the man of letters, or the poet, or the flux of poet or young poet, will not wait for rhetoricians. According to his expression, rhetoricians were supposed to be the legislative or critics, to teach them how to write in their, or how to teach them in their crafts. So this type of literary criticism actually is considered to be the counterpart of literary legislative criticism. Okay, so as I told you, here we are not mainly concerned with a specific literary work, but on the process of creation, the aesthetics of literary works. The last attempts of this types of theoretical criticism, of course, are the works of Richard, are the works of Samuel Coleridge, and the works of other Victorian writers who like Collingwood, and they are considered to be the last attempts of this type of literary criticism. Okay, so this is theoretical criticism. Okay, let's go to the next type of literary criticism, which is supposed to be the evaluative criticism. Okay, so what's meaning evaluative criticism? Evaluative criticism, from the word evaluation, means the making evaluation. So to evaluate the work itself, to evaluate the worth, the value of a given literary work. And of course, such evaluation should be done according to certain rules. So evaluation criticism is a criticism which is concerned with the assessment, the evaluation of the worth or significance of a work. That's okay. So the work here, okay, the critic here, or the work here, should be examined in with reference to specific standards, okay, which they may be aesthetics, moral, it may be purely personal. Of course, according to T.S. Eliot, considers that the ethic and the moral criteria are the standard according to which any given literary work should be judged. So according to T.S. Eliot, and as you know, T.S. Eliot, one of the great formalistic or new critic, American new critic, he one of the formalists. So he considers moral and ethical standards as necessary to determine the greatness of a work of literature. Of course, these principles, these criteria, which might be personal, It is not a good way to judge a work. So one of the most criticism directed to that type of literary criticism is that this type of literary criticism couldn't be objective. Okay, it's largely subjective, and it's more likely to be different from one critic to another. Okay, so in this way, of course, we wanted to have such objective evaluation or assessment of a literary work. Okay, so this is the evaluative literary criticism and the Brachner and the criticism directed to it. So let's go to the next type of literary criticism, which is supposed to be the historical criticism. And of course, as you know, historical criticism from the word history. So you say, here I am mainly concerned with to study, evaluate a literary work being taken against its historical background. Okay, what's the meaning of its historical background? This means that historical background is, as to say, I study a literary work in its historical context. So the history of a given literary work is supposed to be the co-partner of its creation. Why? Because as I told you before, that a given literary work is a product of its time and place. So if a given literary work is a product of its time and place, to say it should be taken in consideration that the time of that literary work, it triggers the creation of this literary work itself. Why? Because of course, in one way or another, we would have the social, economic, religious, political, and literary events and the trends in which, or by means of which, the writer himself is influenced, shaping the formation of that literary work. So I shouldn't avoid all these contexts too much and forget about the literary work itself in the sense of text, in the sense of another sort of other type of literary criticism. Okay, so this type of literary criticism, as I told you, in which the literary critic should consider a literary work in the light or in the shade of its historical background. Okay, so this is the historical criticism. The next type of literary criticism, and it's closely related to historical criticism, is biographical criticism. And as you see from the word biography, so here I am thinking about the life, the personal life. So if you think deeply about this type of literary criticism, you would find or you discover that this type of literary criticism is supposed to be a specific type of historical criticism. Why? Because I am searching the history, but on the level of personal life of the author himself. So according to the author, personal life, I could fully understand his works. What does it mean? This means that this literary work would be examined in the light of the background of the personal life of that writer. Okay, so according to this, I would think about such background, such ancestry. So the grandfathers, the grandmothers of that writer, the personal circumstances, his friends, his profession, his work, his occupation, etc. His level of culture, his level of economy, and of course his marital status, okay, his emotional circumstances, okay, his these biographical background would help me too much to fully understand which incidents, which personal factors helped or hindered that writer to do his work in a certain way, or to shape his work in a certain ideological form. Of course. However, this type of literary criticism is opposed or is strongly opposed or categorically opposed by T.S. Eliot, because T.S. Eliot is completely against the idea of personal poetry, because he believes that poetry is a sort of spontaneous productivity triggered by a certain action, but it's not necessarily to be personal. So a poet, for example, might be inflicted with an experience, and spontaneously he starts to create a literary work or a poem or any form of literature without being related to personal life of the poet or the writer himself. Okay, so this is what's known by biographical criticism. Okay, so biographical criticism, if I asked you, for example, space is a sort of historical criticism in which the literary critic is supposed to focus upon the personal background of the writer himself. Of course, the choice would be biographical criticism. Okay, so as biographical criticism is supposed to be what? It's supposed to be a type of historical criticism. Excellent, very good. What's next? The next is comparative criticism. As I told you, from the name or the title of the type of literary criticism, comparative, from the word comparison. And in this type of literary criticism, the literary critic is supposed to make a comparison. And that comparison should be made on different levels. So to say, in order to understand a given literary work, I should compare it to another given work or another piece of literature. And that comparison would shed light upon the following work, as well as could re-evaluate the earliest one of these works. So to say, according to many critics, they think that literary works are in ongoing evaluation context. So to say, they are conflicting in the idea of worth or the idea of content evaluation assessment along history. How? Because comparing the literary works together, I could fully understand how one of them affected the other, and to what extent I could say that which one of which would be the higher in being a masterpiece. Okay, so as you see, comparative criticism is the criticism in which seeking evaluation of a work by comparing it to one or to another works. And as I told you, that this comparison would be made in different levels, or whether on the level of the one genre. So if you would like to, for example, make a comparison between a short story and another, or on different literary genres, as I say, you could have a comparison between a poem and a novel, a short story and a play, and so on. Okay, so this of course would help you fully understand how a given literary work in the sense of intertextuality would affect another one. And I gave you examples for this type of literary criticism when I said that the Pygmalion as an example for the first written by Ovid in the Roman Empire could affect the French writer of Pygmalion as a poem, then later to G.B. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, a play of Pygmalion, and later Tawfiq al-Hakim Pygmalion also be affected by G.B. Shaw. So as you see, comparing these works together, I could prove that G.B. Shaw affecting Tawfiq al-Hakim Pygmalion, and Tawfiq al-Hakim reading Ovid, he be influenced in the sense of paganism. So unlike the socialist approach of G.B. Shaw, he started to make it in the pagan or paganism style of the polytheism or the multiplicity of gods and so on. However, he is directly influenced by Pygmalion by forming his play Pygmalion by G.B. Shaw in 1922 when he attended that play shown in the British theatre. Okay, so as you see, G.B. Shaw is influenced by Ovid and Tawfiq al-Hakim is influenced by G.B. Shaw. In this way, comparing all these forms of literature, regardless its types, of course, I would think that these works could be evaluated and re-evaluated according or in the light of these comparison. Okay. The next type of literary criticism is supposed to be the descriptive criticism. And the word descriptive from its title, the indicative title, means description. So in this type of literary criticism, unlike thinking about the role of the critic here, I have the writer himself assuming a role of the critic here. How? The writer himself would write against any possible hostile attack on his work. As I say, here, this criticism is written by means of the writer, the author himself. So it's a sort of justification. So unlike the theoretical criticism or unlike the legislative criticism, we have descriptive criticism. So if we assume that the role of critic for the legislative criticism is to lay down, is to set, is to put canons, rules, formulae to teach the poet how to write or how to write better, and the theoretical criticism to set the principles, the rules, the theory of a given literary work, how should it be on being a piece of literature. Here in descriptive criticism, I clarify, I highlight, I point out the point of view of the author himself to see or to let you, as a reader, why should a writer put himself or his work in this way. Okay? So, as I told you, descriptive criticism here is the analysis of exacting literary work of their aims. So the methods, the effects. So who would fully understand all these aims, methods, and effects but the writer himself? So the writer himself is the only person who is supposed to know all these things. And of course, he explained them in as a reaction or as a procedure taken to confront any possible attack against his work or any potential misunderstanding of that work. And as I told you, there is a slight difference between the descriptive, the theoretical, and the legislative criticism, as I told you. So John Dryden himself said, tried to highlight this difference between these types of literary criticism. So he says, this is how, according to, for example, the descriptive criticism, is this how a play, okay, should be written according to what? How a play should be written? This is according to the legislative criticism. Okay, طيب, what's the nature? What's the nature of this tragedy or of this play in general? In general, this is theoretical criticism. Okay, but how I have tried to write my play, and why should I write it in this way? This what's known as descriptive criticism. Okay, so this is a type of literary criticism, of descriptive criticism, which is supposed to be analysis or something like an introduction or forwarding for the work to tell the reader how the author perceives his work and why should he write it in, or why should he write it in this way. Okay, and of course this is done as a means for interpretation, to clarify things for the reader, and also as a pre-procedure to be done before any hostile attack against his work. Okay, that's it. So this is what's known by what's meant by descriptive criticism. The next type of literary criticism is impressionistic criticism. Impressionistic criticism, from the word impression, and impressionistic, that's to say, it is something individual. So impressionistic criticism means individualistic criticism, and of course it's known as the sole endeavor among the masterpieces of literature. So it is the adventures of the soul among the masterpieces. So as you see, it's a matter of a soul. It's not a matter of the mind, but it's a matter of the soul. So the work here is supposed to be impressionistic. So how does your soul inspired by that work? So impressionistic criticism is, of course, a personal response. It records a personal response against or for a given literary work. So it is a record for the critic's own appreciation of aesthetic beauty, okay, untrammeled by any rules and regulations. So unlike the evaluative, unlike the legislative criticism, here we have that critic recording his own evaluation of the aesthetic beauty of a given literary work, untrammeled by any rules and regulations. And of course, this type is well known among the romanticism or romantic criticism. So the critic here does not evaluate a given work. He does not call it good or bad, but rather he would seek to convey his own enjoyment of it to his readers. So the critic here is supposed to tell you or convey to you as a reader what he felt, what he enjoyed out of that literary work. Of course, the most prominent practitioner of the type of literary criticism, Walter Beta, and the romantic critics. Of course, this type, according to this perception of literary criticism, couldn't be objective, and it's a word. It's not a good way for judging a work. Why? Because the impression of a given work, of a given literary critic, could be different, or could be entirely changing from one time to time and from one critic to another, of course. So it wouldn't be objective enough to judge a given literary work. Okay, so this is what's meant by impressionistic criticism. Okay, so let's go to the next type of literary criticism. The next type of literary criticism is textual or ontological criticism. Textual, here I means that I should be preoccupied with the text itself. So this is unlike the theoretical criticism. Why? Because in the text, here the word ontology, the existence. So as to say, according to this type of literary criticism, I supposed to be preoccupied with the text, with the existing work. So, unlike the theoretical criticism, I'm not mainly, according to theoretical criticism, I'm not mainly preoccupied with a specific given literary work, but with the process of the process itself of creation, the artistic beauty. Here, I'm not thinking about a given literary work in general, but in particular, that is say, what I'm mainly concerned with is the text of that literary work, the form of that literary work, the content of that literary work. So here, in the textual criticism, and of course, this is one of the most or the spread and the most highly practiced type of literary criticism. So all the formalists are practicing this type of literary criticism, regard their inclination, whether they are new critics, whether are Russian formalists, and so on. All are highlighting the idea of the text itself. So the golden rule for them is to start with the text and nothing but text. So they are not reading anything outside the text. They are not mainly concerned with the history or the biographical background. They are not mainly concerned with the theory. They are concerned only with the text itself. So they are going to make an analysis of the text, the elements of the text itself, like the rhythm, like the meter, the diction, like the metaphors, the stylistic, and so on. All these are the most important parts that formalistic or textual or ontological criticism are mainly concerned with. Okay, so here according to this type of literary criticism, consider literary text as self-autonomy. So it's completely independent. Okay, so I could fully understand the meaning of a given literary work, regardless its time, regardless its place, regardless its author, regardless any other extra textual factor. Okay, that's it. The next type of literary criticism is psychological criticism. Psychological criticism. And of course, according to this type of literary criticism, I make an evaluation, an interpretation, an assessment of a given literary work in the light of literary theories. What does it mean? Let's say, literary theories, there are many literary theories which supposed to be supposed to help me as a reader, to help me as a critic, to fully understand the mechanism of the author mentality. Okay? What does it mean? This means that this type of literary criticism focusing on the interpretation of a given literary work, as well as the author himself, as well as his characters within that literary work in the light of the literary theories. And of course, this type of literary criticism is helping me to understand the complicated complicated patterns of behavior of the characters themselves. So Sigmund Freud, of course, Bergson, and Carl August Jung are the most prominent figures in which, by means of their theories, I could interpret the character's behavior and fully understand the literary work. Okay, of course, in that type of literary criticism, I could have terms like conscious, like repression, like edible complex, like electra complex, like the collective unconscious, and so on. Okay, so the interpretation of dreams and so on, all these or fully understanding help me fully understand a given literary work. I. Richard is widely considered to be one of the psychologist criticism practitioner or psychological criticism practitioner. Okay? The next type of literary criticism is sociological criticism. Sociological criticism from the world sociology. Sociological or sociologic or Marxist criticism, of course, sociological criticism means that a given literary work should be understood, taken against its social context, or should be taken against its social milieu. That is to say, the social context of a given literary work should help me to fully understand. Why? Because a literary critic could not be taken away from his social context as well as his historical context. So this type of literary criticism helped me to fully understand the social background of a given literary work. And if I think deeply about this social context in the perception of the conflict between the social classes, or the sort of sociological differences, or social differences, seeing the different classes within a given literary work or within the scope of conflict, dispute, a sort of manipulation. If I think about this relationship between the classes, or perceives the literary work as an arena or as a mirror to depict such class conflict or such clash between social classes, this type of literary criticism would be Marxist. So if I generally perceive a given literary work or think about the interpretation of a given literary work in the light of its social milieu, that's what's known as sociological criticism. If I go deeper to think about a given literary work as a mirror to reflect such social classes conflict, then I would think about it as a Marxist criticism. Of course, its meaning is more profound than that simplification that I make for you, but as an introductory level for literary criticism, that's what enough for you to understand the meaning of sociological or Marxist criticism in this way. The last type of literary criticism that we are supposed to study this semester is the archetypal criticism. And the archetypal criticism from the word archetype. And of course, this type of literary criticism is supposed to be a specific type of psychological criticism. So archetypal criticism is a kind of a criticism which attracted consideration or considerable attention in the recent times. By the way, it's widely considered in this recent times. Why? Because it is a type, or as I told you, it's a kind of psychological criticism. Why? Because this type of literary criticism deals with unconscious, or could be said the collective unconscious. What's the meaning of this? This means that the societies, the communities might be influenced with certain archetype. What does it mean? This means that the cultures, whether it is or regardless its level of primitivism or advancedness, it could be influenced by means of certain archetypes. Okay, and I gave you an example of this type of interpretation or this criticism. To think about the myth or the mythology of, for example, life and death and death in life. To think about this myth of death in life or life and death, regardless the primitivism of a given community or the advancedness, we would have the same effect or the same impression of these communities in different ages and different times in different levels of civilization. So thinking about, say, the way the ancient Egyptians used to sacrifice a maiden for that river or for the Nile, to let him go on, to let him flows in his season or in its season. This is a method, or this is a myth for life and death. Also, to think about nowadays our cultural festivals of Sham Nassim, and thinking about that type of the need to go stay next to the river Nile, and might be staying in the gardens, eating something as a sort of recreation, or to think about it in a recreation method for revival or resurrection for life. So not the same rituals of celebration we have it in the highly advanced societies in the 21st century, as well as in that ancient times of the pharaohs or of the ancient Egyptians, are the same way. Also, this type of literary criticism practiced by very prominent or very prominent figures, famous figures, whose writing in this time, Miss Watson and Sir Joseph Fraser. Okay, so Miss Jessie Watson and Mr. James Fraser, Sir James Fraser, are the two prominent figures whose writing in this type of literary criticism, because both of them are busy writing about the myth and mythology, and how the different cultures and different society, regardless its level of primitivism or advancedness, highly are the same way, or in the same degree of influence by the myth or mythology. This type of literary criticism might be said as methodological criticism. It's okay. Why? Because it's driven from the word myth, or can be titled as Teutonic criticism. So it's okay to have it in all these different ways: archetypal, Teutonic, mythological criticism. All of these titles are okay, or these titles are okay. Also, sometimes could be titled as ritualistic, from the word rituals. Why? Because rituals, myth, and archetype or totem, all these are indication for the same thing. Okay, so in this way we are finished with our types of literary criticism. So do you have any question? Do you have any question before we end with our lecture today? If you have any question, please write it in the chat box, please. Thank you very much. Okay, until I see you again. Goodbye.